Hey guys, it's Salads and Bolts, and welcome back to another chapter translation, comparison, analysis thing for chapter 33 of Boruto to Blue Vortex. It's going to take me about 29 minutes to read through this. I hope you all are doing well. This month's chapter had a surprising amount of nuance. If you want something that goes even more in depth to the specific word choice that I use throughout the chapter than this blog, feel free to check out my YouTube page to see me typing live into a Google Doc and making all those micro translation decisions live, not making them up. The mic quality is absolute garbage in that stream, but it's just because I didn't have my mic hooked up. Next month, I'll make sure it's properly set up before I go live. Sorry about that. Without further ado, let's get into the chapter. Title page. There's a lot of text removed on the title page usually, and I just put them back in this blog. So first of all, we're just going to go over the chapter title really quick, which is Kowareru Mirai. The official is Shattering Future. My translation is The Broken Future, and the literal translation is A Future Which Can Be Broken. A lot of times when you have a title, you want something short and snappy, and not My Gift Level 9999 Unlimited Gacha Backstabbed in a Backwater Dungeon, as much as that did become a meme within the anime community. So even though this verb is in the potential form reru to indicate something that can happen, it was simply translated as though it was ing or past tense by both B and the official to account for that short snappiness, even if it takes away some of the nuance. I feel like this is a good chapter title because not only does Koji talk about the future being broken from the second he tells it to someone, Inujin also goes on to do exactly that and break the future. Saying that the future can be broken also gives the reader hope that Boruto can shatter the potential worst possible future down the road as well. But the more people that are brought into this, the less reliable Koji's ability gets. It's an interesting point for sure. The top text is サラダの気絶によりマムシ掃討作戦は失敗。一点窮地に落ちてしまい。My translation was, Sarada faints, the Mamushi plan fails, falling into predicament. Literal translation of that is, due to Sarada passing out, the sweep-up operation ends in failure. After the situation does a 180, they're backed into a corner. That last line uses the word ittenkyuchi and then says falling into that sort of predicament, and the kind of predicament ittenkyuchi is nuance-wise, is a sudden turnaround where a situation changes rapidly from the previous dominance and stability, and you instantly find yourself in a difficult situation where you are cornered. Hence my new translation of the situation doing a 180, so to speak, or the literal translation that I came up with now. This is why some words, quote-unquote, can't be translated, although they can certainly be described, which is what these blog posts are for. The text behind Sarada says, Mamori nuku tame no daishou wa omoku. My translation is, the heavy price to pay in order to protect. And the literal translation of that is, the price is heavy for the sake of protecting something until the end, or someone. Mamori nuku implies this to keep an object in a safe state from external threats and dangers, or to protect it with all your might. It's more than just regular protection because of the nuku, which implies this nuance of through. So like see it protected until the end. See the protection all the way through, I guess would be how I'd phrase that. Then you have tame no, which is for the sake of, and the no particle connects it to the next part. Daisho has the nuance of sacrificing something in order to obtain something. This is where the word price comes in. It actually has the nuance of in psychology and medicine of other parts of the body compensating for when functions of another part of the body is lost, which will likely apply in the future to both the characters who lost their eyes this chapter. And then you have the last word, omoku, which can literally mean heavy as in weight, but also meaning heavy as in seriousness and high importance, like putting an emphasis on something, so relatively similar to the nuances of the word heavy in English. Overall, the whole chapter page very much again ties into the reoccurring themes throughout this chapter, and Ikemoto always ends up using at least one word that has a deeper meaning than what it appears to have on the surface. I love digging into these little details. The page 1 side text. Once again, just including the things the official leaves out in both the volume copies and the digital scans. There's just this little text on the side. Not that it's incredibly important, it's just fun to know what was there. Sarada Kawaki ga taore 計画失敗に1000匹を超えるマムシを前にボルトたちはどう動く My translation. Sarada and Kawaki collapse. The plan is failing. In the face of 1,000 mamushis, what will Boruto and the others do? The literal translation of that is Sarada and /Kawaki collapse, and the plan moves towards failure. Now that over 1,000 mamushis stand before them, what actions will Boruto and the others take? In my translation, I forgot to include the nuance of over 1,000 mamushis. I just needed to add that word, and I guess I forgot. Sorry about that. Either way, this is just a little introductory hook text that usually closely mimics the top text on the cover page, but this one included Kawaki. I also think it's interesting that they didn't say Sarada and Kawaki, but put a dot in between their names, which on the keyboard, when you press the slash key, that dot appears instead of a slash in Japanese, and you have to like scroll through the menu for the slash. But anyway, it's almost like it's separating them farther, as if putting an and there would group them together when they're not meant to be grouped. Which is kind of true, because Sarada is completely out of commission and Kawaki's not. But they both did fall over in that sense, and like taoreta. But it takes up the same exact amount of space, and in almost every other header I've seen for Two Blue Vortex, they use the to in Japanese hiragana to, or they just don't put the other person's name and say tachi, so Sarada tachi. And I've also seen the and symbol, but this is my first time seeing a dot. I just think it's interesting, and it applies a bit more distance between the grouping, if that makes sense. That's all. Worry about Sarada instead, on page 2. I've seen a lot of people commenting on Kawaki telling Himawari to worry about Sarada instead of him, and saying, wow, Kawaki was actually worried about someone? But this isn't really Kawaki worrying about Sarada as much as it is him telling Himawari there's nothing she can do for him, because his issue isn't something her healing powers can fix. But there is something that she can do for Sarada, because she's bleeding and Himawari's powers can fix that. It's a much more a surface level, leave me alone and go do that other thing that is actually important, kind of gruff dismissal, almost like he doesn't deserve Himawari's concern and she should direct it at someone who actually needs it. That's kind of what this line is doing there, at least in Japanese. For many chapters now, Kawaki has been very against taking Boruto's position in Himawari's life. He specifically pushes her away on multiple occasions, especially with his speech, all the way back from either chapter 1 or 2, where he says, "How many times have I told you not to call me big brother?" Part of Kawaki's character is refusing to accept concern and care from the people around him, especially after omnipotence, to the point that he turned into a self-destructive ticking time bomb with his upgrades. Of course, when Himawari isn't watching, it's clear he cares about her, like with lines such as, "If Himawari was in danger, you should have told me that first, darn it." But in front of her directly, he rejects any shred of concern she shows him, and this seems to be another example of that. I want to do an analysis of his character and speech patterns for you guys, because Kawaki is one of the characters that the official is almost forced to censor. His speech is incredibly rough, and you can really see his background and his painful past showing through in the way he speaks, especially towards other people, and especially towards Himawari in comparison to everyone else. Sumire's reaction, and the quote being Sarada's condition, on page 2. "Boruto-kun, Sarada no yodai wa?" Official is, "Boruto, what's Sarada's condition?" My translation was, "Boruto-kun, what's Sarada's physical condition?" Before I even get to the breakdown, notice how they changed Sumire's punctuation again to make it sound like she's not yelling, even though in Japanese her words are bold, and she has an exclamation point and a question mark exclamation point. And in the official she just has ... and question mark. Anyway, I'll go on a rant about translation bias later. But I actually deleted one of my rants from this that I kind of included in the live stream if you want to watch that for a rant. But time and time again, we've seen people's loved ones fall into danger. And what's usually the first thing that happens? They shout their name. Boruto did it in giant bold font when something happened to Sarada last chapter. Even Ada shouts, "Sarada-chan," out of worry. Konohamaru shouts, "Boruto, is Sarada alright?" And Mitsuki goes straight to her side. When Boruto passes out back in chapter 11, both Sarada and Sumire shout his name as well. But in this chapter, Sumire sits back idly and watches, and the first name that comes out of her mouth in bold letters is Boruto-kun. And then, in my translation, she asks, what is Sarada's physical condition? You might think, man, it's weird that she would say physical condition. What's up with that? That slightly off-putting feeling is there in Japanese as well. It's not the typical line you'd say when concerned about a friend. And indeed, you'd be right. What this line is doing is something slightly different. Japanese is a language that uses a lot of pragmatics. An example of pragmatics would be saying, "Boy, it sure is hot in here," and hoping that someone will take the cue and open the classroom window, or the window in general. Pragmatics are basically saying something on a surface level where your intentions lie somewhere else, even though you do mean the first thing literally. Sumire is a character who uses them quite often throughout the manga, and it comes as no surprise that this line is no exception. While on the surface, it seems she is concerned about Sarada, underneath, this line instead seems to deal more with Boruto. This word yodai feels like a commander on the battlefield asking about the physical functioning of a soldier. This is not "daijoubu nano?" This is not "heiki nano?" This is not "buji nano ka?" All of which are common to say if you want to make sure your friend is okay or alive and breathing. This is very specifically asking about Sarada no yodai, which is more concerned with her current physical state. Now before you think I'm hating on Sumire and calling her a bad friend, I'm not. Obviously in the "man, it's hot in here" example, the other person indeed is literally hot and sweating, which is why they're trying to get the other person to open the window subtly. Sumire does indeed want to know what Sarada's physical condition is. But the purpose of the underlying motive and what Sumire seems to be doing in this moment was asking a question to ground Boruto in the reality of what he should be doing as a ninja, to pull him out of his frantic mental state of worry for Sarada and back into the Mamushi fight. And it's got a bit of her usual spice of underlying jealousy as well. People on X were already comparing her face on page 5 to the face she makes when Boruto hugs Sarada. Mind you, Sumire's whole character is putting that sort of jealous love onto display. That's her type of love. Every character in Boruto has a different one. This is an extension of that, and it has again been elaborated on in previous chapters, especially in chapters 16 and 25. To add icing onto the cake, she just watched her crush cradle another girl in midair and scream her name, and now he's on the ground with her in his arms wiping blood from her face. It's hard to see the guy you like paying so much attention to someone else. Even if you are friends, you can still be jealous. And this whole idea is layered time and time again throughout Sumire's dialogue that almost pits Sarada as more of a love rival in Sumire's eyes, and that's especially true in chapter 25. It seems as though Ikemoto had her frame her concern with a more distant and literal verbiage in this moment for that reason as well. You might say, well, what about the scene where they run away holding hands? And all I have to say to that is, go read my chapter 25 language analysis to figure out some of the background things going on there. To further my point about Sumire's underlying motive being more about grounding Boruto, notice how the second she asks about Sarada's physical condition, Boruto tilts Sarada's head, more carefully expecting the injury from various angles. He reports that she's alive and breathing first, which shows how kind of scattered his brain was into thinking something much worse happened to her. When she fell last chapter, the first thing he did was scream her name and then again say, "She's unconscious," and "Oi, Sarada," trying to get her attention, even though he knows she's passed out. His logic brain kind of broke for a few minutes from panic. And then Sumire's comment gets him to calm down and realize that she is indeed alive, and it's just her eye that's damaged. But anyway, Konohamaru then asks if she's alright, using one of the above listed phrases for concern, and Boruto responds with a harsh, "I don't know, darn it," and doesn't take his eyes off of her until the beginning of this chapter, and it's only for one panel. It isn't until Sumire asks about her physical condition that he slows down and starts more carefully inspecting the injury to report on her being alive and suspecting the extent of physical damage to just her eye, then staring at her helplessly and freaking out. Either way, to summarize from this line, it seems like Sumire was more concerned about getting more Boruto emotionally grounded and back into the fight than she was about Sarada passing out through her language, contrary to the language used by Konohamaru, Eida, Mitsuki, Himawari, and even Kawaki, who deflected Hima's concern onto Sarada, and most obviously Boruto. What's clear, she still holds concern for Sarada. There's a comparative distance relative to the others added along with it that is also shows perhaps a bit of jealousy and wanting to disengage Boruto's attention, but for a good reason. So that's just, anyway. Zerp on page 6. I like how no one questioned this on X or my YouTube page when I asked for questions, when it's literally something that Daemon is saying and not some random sound effect. Booty is the Japanese there. The official is zerp, and my translation was stumbling around. This onomatopoeia is something I couldn't describe in the few words that I had, or something that would make sense for a character to say in this situation. I couldn't translate it anyway. There are two meanings. One is slang for the state of being under the influence of cannabis or drugs, and the other is a state of being excited or having momentum. So, you can either say Daemon is calling Mamushi high, or you can say he's on the edge of his seat waiting for these clones to come at him, and I think it's both. Yay, onomatopoeia! Prescience and Amado on page 9. You can see my translation is slightly different from the official here, and I wanted to point out why. So let's take a look at the side-by-side first. Jippo, mirai shi dato, sonna koto ga. The official, this is Amado speaking by the way, the official was, prescience? Precognition? Such a thing is possible? My translation was, 10 paths, is able to see the future? And the literal translation is, 10 paths. Seeing the future, you say? That kind of thing is. To break down why the official did what they did, first they always translate 10 paths to prescience and I leave it as 10 paths or 10 directions because I like that translation better, but prescience and precognition is just straight up being able to see into the future. Technically, the official's more correct nuance-wise on that second line. Instead of is able to see into the future, it should be closer to what I translated it literally for the third time of seeing the future, you say, as if he's curious about the ability. The third thing is where the Japanese does that thing where it trails off, and the official autofilled it with something, and I just left it vague. Sonna koto ga in Japanese literally means that thing is, and the sentence trails away. he might not be wondering about the possibility, he might be reflecting on something else. But the official chose a likely interpretation and put it in there so it wouldn't be left as open-ended in English, which it does whenever there's a line like this, which the official usually fills whenever there's a line like this. But anyway, destroying the future on page 9. 未来を知るということはすなわち未来を壊すことに他ならんのだと. That to know the future leads to the act of destroying it, is the official's translation, and mine was, to see the future is to break the future. This was just a direct callback to that title that I was a little sad the official didn't put in, because it's such a cool line. And the Japanese even emphasized the word kowasu with the emphasis dots, which is break. And the title, Shattered Future, you'd think they put to know the future leads to the act of shattering it, so it still had that direct callback, but I guess they didn't care. This was my favorite line of the chapter, so I had to throw it back in here and explain it. A mountain of corpses. Some of you on YouTube were curious about this line, or one of you on YouTube was curious about this line. But anyway, the phrase is literally shitai no yama, a corpse mountain, and Shikarai after that says mojidori, which means to the letter or literally. The reason he makes sure this is interpreted as literally is because it's also a phrase used in the context of making huge sacrifices or the catastrophic failure of plans, as in building a pile of corpses. So you can also use it like the project failed, leaving the company with a pile of corpses in terms of financial losses. But the term originated to describe an actual gruesome mountain of corpses and evolved over time to have a more figurative meaning, which is why Shikadai emphasizes after saying that he means it literally. Your honest assessment, on page 15. In the official, Boruto says, Lord 8th, I'd like your honest assessment. What do we do? But that sounds way too stiff for Boruto's general tone, as well as his tone in Japanese for that moment, in my opinion. This is one of the places where the official leaves it literal instead of changing for character tone, even though for other characters they change their tone according to the view of the character for almost every single line. A bit of translator bias, perhaps, which we're about to get to. Anyway, he does in Japanese say, sunao ni kikitai, which literally means, I want to ask honestly, or tell me your honest opinion, but I want your honest assessment. Sounds like Koji's speech. Boruto, while he does hang out with Koji quite a bit, doesn't use Koji-level speech. I just had answer me in my translation, which again is changing it to fit my interpretation of Boruto's tone, but that's also because this phrase, sunao ni kikitai, still sounds natural in Japanese. It's almost like, give it to me straight, or be honest with me. I think either of those would have been a better fit in this situation than what I or the official had, looking back on it. Translation bias side rant. Also, we've been talking in my socialization of translation class, which I'm currently taking this semester, lately about how a person's perception of a character can change their translations, and how much of a role a translator has in shaping character personalities through chosen dialogue, and as also how that chosen perception may shift from the original. So I'm going to go on an applicable side tangent, hopefully quickly. Let me first explain that in this blog, where I talk about my reasonings behind translating the way I do while giving you breakdowns of the words, a lot of that opportunity for bias is removed, especially since you can simply look up what I'm saying to validate it, since I put in the original words to give you the opportunity to do so. I also have much more time to explain these kinds of things in detail rather than just providing you with a one-size-fits-all translation of a line. However, if I want to filter that explanation through my own biased lens, as some on the internet have done, cough, not mentioning any names, that most of you would be I could, and most of you would be none the wiser, which is why a translator at times holds quite a bit of power over the audience they are translating for. The example we were given in class was, old cockerel seeks hen to scratch around new pastures. Ex-farmer 57 seeks lady 45 to 55 without ties to move to Hans, Dorset, and develop a natural self-sufficient lifestyle. Think of the type of man you pictured when reading that. What kind of person does he seem to be? When my teacher first asked me this and asked the accompanying categories to go along with it, I was like, but wait, I don't want to stereotype him, but don't worry, it's part of the exercise. This man will not be offended. He is fake. You might picture some old white farmer, maybe with a beer belly, a little taller with broad shoulders, salt and pepper hair, maybe he's wearing flannel, maybe he has a more traditional outlook on what he wants in a wife. Your view could have been completely different. The person who wrote that translation pictured a redhead, apparently. But in the end, it can affect the twist you put on that first line when you're translating it. Your views of character personality eventually shape how you translate words that have this kind of wiggle room, so to speak, and the type of personality in the target culture you choose to equate it to, which is something that happens with dub, where they have to make up a new personality in the target culture and pick a set of vocab that fits with that personality. It's the same thing I talked about in my About page, which is linked here, with the example, "Hun, how many times have I told you not to eat off the doggone floor?" If you translate that literally and straight, it sounds really flat in Japanese. So if you want to give it that kind of character, you have to choose the kind of character to give it in Japanese, since this kind of, like, southernish style person doesn't exist. So you might translate it into being like Osaka-ben or Kansai-ben or something a little bit more regional, or adding these nuances that wouldn't normally exist, instead of just taking it literally. But all of that character interpretation and bias is included whenever you do a translation or localization of a character, which is for translated manga and dubbed anime. And it's why it's important that you understand your character stereotypes and underlying cultural meanings in both cultures before you attempt to translate anything. And it's also another reason why characters feel so different for me in sub and dub, even though I can understand both languages, because the same character stereotypes and personalities do not exist across cultures. If you want to see a much more severe example of this, watch the 4Kids dubbed of something and compare it to the subtitles of the subbed version, and you'll be like, what the heck? People do that on the internet all the time with Dragon Ball. But anyway, I do my best to explain them on this blog, and I really want to make a post for each character describing my views on the kind of person they seem to be and why, with specific examples from their dialogue in Japanese. It's also interesting because Ikemoto's understanding of his characters are different than Kodachi's, who assisted in the making of the anime and wrote the light novels, and then of course the dubbed characters feel like separate entities entirely with relatively similar personality traits. The main differences in characterization from Viz's understanding in comparison to the Japanese that are easy to point out and explain are Sumire, because her punctuation is changed to soften her tone more oftentimes than not; Kawaki, because his rough speech is largely removed due to censorship; Sarada, her tone is actually made out to be stiffer and harsher in terms of punctuation and word choice a lot of times, but it is left slightly more intact than Sumire and Kawaki; and of course people like Ryu, who are full-on teenage slang that the official really struggled to put any sort of current teenager spin on. It also comes up in things like formal conversations, but that's to be expected since English can't really indicate politeness levels. Either way, anytime anything is translated, there is indeed a level of bias and viewpoint shifting that goes into it. As for how drastic it is depends on the translator, the publisher, and the material. I made a graph of this recently and posted it on X if anyone would like to see it, and the creative side is essentially the people in charge putting their own twist on things to reformat it for the target audience. Sorry for the stomach noises. In this blog, I have the freedom to sit down and explain my views and the reasoning behind my decisions to you, as well as go back on what my initial understanding was after taking the time to compare and really look closely at what is being said. But official pages and translations don't typically have that freedom or that time, and they likely already have their own ideas of characters cemented in their minds, which likely won't change because they want to keep things consistent. So what you see is what you get, and you can only speculate. Nujutsu. When Inujin cuts himself off and fades away after yelling at Koji that this situation is ridiculous, his line, Nujutsu, is actually in much smaller font than the Japanese chapter than the font he was previously using, to indicate he's taking a step back and thinking. Sorry, that was really confusing. There's a spot where Inujin is like, what is even the point of this jutsu? And then he's like, what was even the point of learning this new jutsu? And then he trails off and he's like, new jutsu, and that's like smaller. That was the point of that. Sorry. I did indicate it in my Google Doc to be smaller, but this month the usual typesetter for eShadow fell ill, so another typesetter took over, which I am incredibly grateful for. I did comment on the font changes being a little bit drastic at times and the lettering being a bit small at times, which I feel terrible about nitpicking since the main guy was unwell, although I did offer to do it myself, the typesetting, despite my style being much more plain and simple since I don't use a paid software, and he did also ask for my critiques. But I don't know why I explained all that. But anyway, the part of the translation is the font choices and bold, italicized, emphasized, de-emphasized words, since that gives off emotional nuance. And something the official does is simplify those stylistic choices or omit them altogether. So I usually try to have them indicated when I do my own typesetting or in the Google Doc I send, so hopefully they're put in for you guys to see. But if something is different, I'll likely comment on it here too. And I wish a speedy recovery to the main typesetter for eShadow. Darn futures on page 19. This may be the first time Koji says a curse word, and this is the second instance of him using the title in the dialogue. The Japanese was "soitsu de kawashite yare, kuso mitai na mirai o na." so use it to shatter those darn futures. My translation was, let's shatter that awful future with this new jutsu. And the literal translation was, let's use it to shatter break that crappy future. Word I can't say. Starts with a S. Me and the official both felt that using the S word was a little out of Koji's usual vocabulary. I translated it to awful because in Japanese, while kuso is a curse word of sorts, it's also just used for emphasis on feelings to make things stronger. Kuso panda is crappy panda. Every time I say the word crappy, it's the S word, by the way, which is what Boruto calls that bear panda at the beginning of the manga. He also calls his dad Kuso Oyaji, or crappy old man. But in both these contexts, Boruto is a younger boy, and it might not be entirely appropriate for an English audience, for him to be going around using the S word, which is a specifically harsh word that you can get in trouble for saying in certain schools or in front of your parents, whereas in Japanese, that word is more like, yes, you don't really want to say it in front of teachers or your parents, but if you said it in passing to a friend out of frustration as a young kid in front of an adult, I don't think anyone would bat an eye or call you out on it or try and correct you or tell you your language is too harsh. You'd have to say something a little stronger than that for that to happen. In that sense, it is out of the ordinary for Koji to use it here, but instead of being surprised at a curse word, I was more surprised at how strongly he seems to detest the future where Ada and Himawari are killed along with Inujin. It makes Koji seem like not that bad of a guy, again, while Boruto very much sees him in a bad light. Also, the word koitsu, or soitsu there, I took it as referencing Inujin's new jutsu, but it should have been just the overall method or idea Koji was referring to that Inujin was about to carry out. It was vague, and I chose the wrong filler word, and then I didn't go back to correct it. Although, I have a theory, which I'm only going to talk about in this YouTube video. But, because Inujin learned this new jutsu, and like, you know how Daemon's ability wasn't quite reflecting to everyone before, but Inujin's new jutsu like links everyone's mind mentally through like the vibrations or whatever. I don't 100% remember how the exact explanation of it works, but I think it was only because he had that new ability to link everyone that even though he took over this like collective consciousness or hive mind, it reflected onto all of Mamushi's bodies because of this like linked thing, that linked mind link ability thing that he came up with in terms of like being able to sense where everybody is as well through like vibrations and stuff. But I think that's linked somehow into the reason why it didn't work when Daemon reflected for all of the Mamushi clones, and it only worked for some of them, whereas when Inujin took over and manipulated Mamushi's brain or the collective consciousness or whatever, then it applied to all of them suddenly. So I think that was an effect of his ninjutsu, even though he just used mind transfer on the Mamushi clone. But anyway, I don't know about that. Well, somebody can talk about it with me in the comments and make it sound more nice instead of whatever I just said. But take care of me after on page 25. This is another line that Inujin says to Himawari. And the Japanese is Ato tanomu ne, and the official is take care of me after. My translation was take care of the rest. For this, I was originally debating between I'll leave the aftermath to you, or something like that. I forget what exactly it was I said, but if you watch that translation live stream, it's in there. But because this line is usually translated to take care of the rest in subtitles and the like, I went with that, even though judging by the context, it would have been better to leave it literal. So that's on me. Also, the official actually bolded the word with emphasis dots this time. Sometimes the words are just randomly bolded, and sometimes they aren't when they should be. But this time it actually lines up. Usually, I think Ino said something along the lines of, take care of my body for me, but I think Inujin knows that since Himawari has a healing power and he'll likely need to be healed, he's counting on her to heal him. Anyway, a thorn bulb on page 40. If you notice in my translation, I have Kawaki saying, so that's a soul thorn? As if he didn't already see one back in chapter 11. That was my bad. The Japanese there is just, are wa togetama, which is literally, that is a soul thorn. I don't know why I did that. I think I was distracted at this point because I was doing it live and people were asking me questions and we were getting really sidetracked. And I translated this ending part very quickly. But that's not really an excuse. Come to my stream next point. next month to point out my mistakes, please. I really enjoy when people are like kind of watching over my shoulder while I do this kind of thing to help prevent me making mistakes. Although if I get sidetracked, then it just leads to me making mistakes. But when we're focused, man, when we're focused, it works out well. While I'm at it, I also want to explain the reason why I say soul thorn is because the kanji that make up the word, those are the kanji that make up the word, except it's actually thorn, which is toge, and soul, which is tamashi, and that order and not the reverse, so I don't know why I chose soul thorn and not thorn soul, but the bulb part comes from, in the official, I guess, from it being like a seedling of sorts, in reference to them being trees, but Japanese it just says thorn soul. Not letting a shinobi, not a shinobi and not letting it rot. Not a shinobi and letting it rot on page 41. This is something that Boruto says to Kawaki at the end that was different in my translation than the official in a couple languages, as people pointed out to me on X. But the Japanese is shinobi ne daro, muda ni kusarase chimau no yo. The official is, it'd be a shame to let it rot away, wouldn't it? My translation is, he isn't a shinobi. He might end up rotting away. I don't know why, but apparently most translations remove the nuance of the word shinobi being in there. I'm not quite sure why. Again, I repeated myself, but sorry about that. Maybe they thought it was too much text for the speech bubbles. But my translation is pretty much literally what it says in Japanese. If I were to translate for full nuance, it'd probably be like, it's not like he's a shinobi. There's also the fact that he might end up needlessly rotting away. To give you the breakdown, it's shinobi is shinobi, and then ne, he's not, daro, right, muda ni, needlessly, uselessly, kusarase chimau, end up rotting away. Sorry, that word is kind of when you're speaking English, it's not easy to say. Anyway, nomoyo, there's also the fact that. So yeah, I'm not really quite sure why they just took that out. It's not super important, but I do think it goes to say that people who aren't shinobi will rot quicker, which I feel like is an important detail. The last page side text says, キーにされたバグを元に戻そうとするボルト。しかしそれを待ち伏せる怪しい名が。My translation is, Boruto plans to revert Bug back from his tree form, but whose mysterious eye lies in wait. The literal is, Boruto's attempting to put Bug back to how he was before he turned into a tree, but the mysterious eye lies in wait. Sometimes I try my best to make these shorter because I know it's difficult to squeeze them into that side part, but it's still pretty much the same. Either way, Code is back! We might see some sort of action next chapter? Can't wait for future developments. I can pronounce V's. That's all I have for you this month. I managed to contain myself to 2 minorly related side rants, one of which I deleted and put into a different post. But have a great rest of your day wherever you are in the world. Until next month. And just to advertise, eventually, I am going to go over how shoujo tropes apply. And we'll leave that for later. But yeah, how exciting. Alright, that's all for now. See you. Bye.